Hello, my friends. Welcome back. This one begins not with a designer, or an engineer, or a founder. It begins with a group of workers who refuse to leave a factory. And it ends with a name that has outlived every company that ever owned it. But before either of those things, I need to tell you about a man who tried to kill this motorcycle before it was ever built. A man who was not a rival manufacturer, not a regulator, not a competitor from Japan. He was the chief designer of Triumph itself. He said the engine would crack. He said the project was too aggressive. He recommended against it. The engineers kept working anyway. And somewhere between that argument in a Coventry office and a factory full of workers who locked themselves inside rather than leave, a street was built. A residential street. In England, in the town where the factory once stood. The name of that street is what this story was always building toward. We will get there. September 1973. Meriden, England. A motorcycle factory employing 1,700 people receives an announcement. The company that owns it intends to close it down. The workers do not leave. Instead, they walk to the factory gates and lock them from the inside. They occupy the building, the assembly lines, the machine shops, the cafeteria. They do not go home. They go to work. Inside a factory they have been told is no longer theirs. They continue building the motorcycle they have always built. The one they know how to build better than anyone else in the world. The occupation lasts 18 months. The British government eventually steps in with a loan. The workers form a cooperative and run the factory themselves. And for the next 8 years, the most famous British motorcycle ever made is built by the people who refused to let it die. Owned not by a corporation, but by the men and women who assembled it with their hands. The motorcycle they were fighting for was the Triumph Bonneville. And before we reach that factory, before we get to what the occupation cost them, and what they built anyway, and how it ended, there is a story that begins 17 years earlier, in a desert in Utah, at 214 miles per hour. Because the name Bonneville did not come from a meeting room or a marketing department. It came from a moment in American history that Triumph's management in England read about in the newspapers and understood immediately. A name that was not chosen. A name that was earned. On the 6th of September 1956, a man named Johnny Allen climbed into a streamlined projectile on the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah and opened the throttle. The machine that pushed him to 214 miles per hour, 214.4 to be precise, was powered by a modified Triumph twin engine. An American rider. An American desert. A British engine. A speed record that nobody had touched before. Triumph's management in Coventry looked at what Johnny Allen had done with their engine and made a decision. The next motorcycle they released, a new high-performance twin they had been developing, would carry the name of that desert. Bonneville, the place where a Triumph engine had gone faster than any motorcycle engine had ever gone before. The name was not marketing. It was evidence. And then the chief designer of the company tried to stop the whole thing from happening. Edward Turner was one of the most important figures in British motorcycle history. Chief designer of Triumph. The man who had shaped the company's most significant machines for decades. He did not want this motorcycle to exist. He had looked at the specifications his engineers were proposing. Twin carburetors, higher compression, performance pushed to the edge of what a production engine could reliably sustain. And he believed the engine would not hold together at the speeds being promised. 6,500 revolutions per minute, sustained, in the hands of ordinary riders on public roads. He said the engine would crack. He said the project was too aggressive. He recommended against it. The engineers who believed in the project kept working. The Triumph Bonneville T120 was revealed at the Earl's Court Motorcycle Show in London in September 1958. Pearl Grey and Tangerine. Twin Amal carburetors. A promised top speed of 120 miles per hour, the number in its name, the target that defined what it was asking the world to believe. Edward Turner's prediction did not come true. The engine held, and in the opinion of every publication that wrote it, the Bonneville delivered something no British production motorcycle had managed before: genuine sport performance, at a price that serious riders could reach, in a machine that could also be ridden to work on a Monday morning. Through the 1960s, what the Bonneville built was not just a sales record. It built something harder to manufacture and impossible to copy: a cultural presence, a position inside films, inside music, inside the idea of what it meant to be young and fast and free in post-war Britain and America. And then, in 1969, that presence met its most serious challenge. Not from a rival British manufacturer, from Japan, from a machine that arrived and made the entire British motorcycle industry look like it belonged to a different century. Through the 1960s, the Bonneville built a reputation that went beyond the racetrack. In 1969, a rider named Malcolm Uphill won the Isle of Man Production TT on a Bonneville, completing a lap at an average speed of 99.99 miles per hour, close enough to 100 that the achievement entered the language. Motorcyclists who pushed their machines past the 100-mile-per-hour mark began calling themselves ton-up boys. The Bonneville was the machine most of them were riding. That same year, a stunt rider named Bud Ekins, close friend of Steve McQueen, performed the famous motorcycle jump at the end of The Great Escape. The jump that audiences around the world watched and attributed to McQueen himself, who appeared in earlier scenes, was Ekins on a Bonneville. The insurance company would not let McQueen do the jump himself. Ekins did it. The Bonneville got the close-up. Marlon Brando had already connected the Triumph name to rebellion in The Wild One. Bob Dylan would crash a Triumph on a road in upstate New York in 1966 and disappear from public life for more than a year. Whether by performance or by association, the Bonneville had become something that transcended motorcycle journalism. It was in films. It was in songs. It was in the idea of what it meant to move through the world at speed, on your own terms, answerable to nothing except the road. And then Honda arrived. In the same year as the ton-up lap, the same year as the Ekins jump, Honda revealed the CB750. And what it revealed, in the same moment, was something the British industry had not been prepared to admit. The gap between where Triumph was and where motorcycling was going had become, overnight, very difficult to close. For cylinders, 67 horsepower, a front disc brake, an electric starter, reliable beyond anything the British industry had produced, priced at a point that made Triumph's engineering look both outmatched and overpriced for what it offered. The Bonneville was 46 horsepower, 2 cylinders, drum brakes, kickstart. In 1959, this had been the fastest production motorcycle in the world. In 1969, it was suddenly behind the conversation. Triumph's response made things worse. In 1971, the company introduced a new frame design in which the oil was carried inside the frame tubes rather than in a separate tank. The frame sat higher. Riders found it awkward. The modification had been developed without adequate consultation with the dealers who would have to sell it or the riders who would have to live with it. Sales fell further. By 1973, the British motorcycle industry was fracturing under the weight of Japanese competition, labor disputes, and a string of management decisions that had eroded both quality and confidence. And then the announcement came to Meriden, and the workers made a decision that no motorcycle company had ever seen before and has not seen since. 1,700 people, 18 months. They assembled motorcycles inside an occupied factory while the legal and political arguments played out around them. They were not saboteurs. They were builders. They simply refused to accept that what they had spent their working lives making should end because a boardroom had decided it should. The British Labour government provided a loan. The workers formed the Meriden Motorcycles Cooperative in 1975 and continued production. They built the Bonneville, the same engine, the same name, under worker ownership for 8 more years. On the 23rd of August, 1983, the cooperative ran out of road. The money was gone. The market had moved on. The factory closed for the last time. The site was sold. Houses were built on it. The street that runs through the development where the Meriden factory once stood is called Bonneville Close. And yet, the name did not die with the factory. What happened next is one of the stranger second acts in the history of any industrial brand, because the person who kept it alive was not a motorcycle engineer, not a rider, not a romantic. He was a property developer, and he had been working in silence for years before anyone knew what he was doing. The Bonneville did not stay dead. A man named Les Harris, working from Devon in the south of England, obtained the rights and built Bonnevilles in small numbers from 1985 to 1988. He made 1,255 of them before that too came to an end. Then silence. 12 years in which no new Bonneville was built anywhere on Earth. But in 1983, the same year the Meriden Cooperative had collapsed, a property developer named John Bloor had purchased the Triumph name and trademark for £150,000. He had said nothing publicly. He had built a factory in Hinckley, England, and spent years developing new motorcycles entirely out of view. In 1991, the first Hinckley Triumphs appeared. In 2001, he introduced a new Bonneville, modern engine, modern engineering, the same name, the same visual DNA. Purists argued, as they always do, that the new machine was not the real thing. It was not built at Meriden. The engineers who built the original were long gone. In 2016, Triumph brought back the T120 designation itself, a 1,200 cubic centimeters liquid-cooled engine, the twin carburetor silhouette maintained in the styling, the round headlamp, the peanut tank. A man who had bought a name for £150,000 had turned it into a machine worth riding again, and a company worth more than any motorcycle business in Britain since the industry's collapse 4 decades earlier. And that is the question this story has been building toward from the very first frame. Not what the Bonneville is mechanically, not how fast it goes or how much it costs, but what a name actually is, and what it means for a name to outlive every company that ever owned it. The name Bonneville was given to this motorcycle because of something that happened in a desert in Utah, because of a speed record set by an American on a British engine, because Triumph understood that the word carried a promise. Speed, distance, the suggestion of a horizon you were actually going to reach. That name outlived Edward Turner, who tried to stop the motorcycle from being built. It outlived the Meriden factory, which closed twice. It outlived the cooperative that 1,700 workers built from their refusal to give up. It outlived Les Harris's careful, limited attempt to keep it going. It passed through the hands of a property developer who bought it for less than the price of a house and turned it back into something that mattered. A name is only as strong as what it means to the people who hear it. For 65 years, Bonneville has meant the same thing it meant in 1959. Fast, British, real. My friends, if you have ever been told that what you are building is not worth continuing, that the market has moved on, that the moment has passed, that the factory should close, the Bonneville is worth sitting with. Not because it always won. It did not always win. It was outclassed, outmaneuvered, and outlasted by machines that were faster and cheaper and more modern. But the name survived, because enough people, at enough different moments, decided that what the name meant was worth fighting for. Workers locked the gates. A property developer quietly bought the trademark. A team of engineers in Hinckley built it again from nothing. The name outlived all of them. It is still here. Whatever yours is, hold on to it. Before you go, tell me in the comments which part of this story stayed with you. Was it Edward Turner, the chief designer, trying to stop his own company's most famous motorcycle before it was built? The workers who locked themselves inside a factory and refused to leave for 18 months? Bonneville Close, the residential street built on the site where they made their last stand? The property developer who bought the name for £150,000 and gave it back to the world? Or the 3 deaths and 3 returns of a name that simply refused to stay gone? Subscribe if you want to follow these stories wherever they lead. Until then, hold on to the name. Whatever yours is, hold on to it.